Hello, everybody, and welcome to TGI Kubernetes. I am Joe Beda. I'm a principal engineer at VMware. Was the CTO of Heptio. We're now part of VMware, which is very exciting. And TGI Kubernetes, for those who aren't aware, is a weekly live broadcast that we do where I take a technology, a new thing happening in the Kubernetes world, play with it live. A lot of times I don't have a lot of grounding in it, so I'm learning along with everybody else and bring some context, explore, see what's going on, that type of thing. And so we are on episode 72, which kind of blows my mind. I had no idea that when I started it that we'd get this far. But one of the things I like to do is start out by saying hi to everybody who's joining from around the world. When we first started doing these things, I didn't realize that 1 p.m. on a Friday afternoon on the west coast of the U.S. means for a lot of other folks that it's either going to be Friday night or Saturday morning. So if you're spending your Friday night with me, thanks for doing that. Quick shout out to a lot of folks. Let's see. So we have Bosbank, who's saying hi from Lagos, wondering what the topic is today. We're going to be talking about Kustomize, and I'll explain the relevance of the image that I picked. Martin from the Netherlands, Ola from Denmark, welcome, welcome. Sandeep from Poland. Let's see, Ali, good to see you. I saw you on Twitter saying this is the first time you're able to join us live. Jesse, Lamatti, good to see you again. You're with us almost every time. Bob from Michigan. Christoph from Germany. Let's see, Ivan. Saeed from London. David in Minnesota. Abhishek from India. Steve, Steve wrote an article we're going to be talking about. It's going to be exciting. Peter, Sadaz from New York, Krish from the UK, Lee from Denver, awesome, Mike, Shahar, let's see, Martin, 72 episodes to say hello. Well, hello to you too. Let's see, Fabio from Brazil, Brendan from Chicago. Yeah, I grew up outside Chicago. Ben, Aaron from Orange County. Good to see you all. All right. So today's topic is going to be Kustomize, and the image here, and I'll switch to the screen a little bit here. The image here is a bunch of patches, like patches that you put on like a uniform or what have you, because the whole idea with Kustomize is that we move away from templating towards something where you actually have deltas on top of YAML. So you have base YAML, and then you actually have ways to modify that with patches using some of the patch strategies that are built into Kubernetes. Now, as this happened, it's sort of grown a little bit. There is like a little bit of sort of specialized type of stuff that's got mixed in. We'll dig into sort of like where patches fit, where other things fit, sort of pros and cons of templating. That's some of the stuff we're going to dig into. But that's why I had the image here that we have. So the first thing first, we have a HackMD, which is like a way that we can collaboratively edit a YAML file. So if you want to take notes as we go, that's super appreciated. Especially if you want to take time codes and say, hey, at this particular time, something interesting happened. That'll help folks that come later if they want to find a part of the episode. So yeah, if we can crowdsource that, the link should be in the comments there if you want to find that. And then we check these into GitHub later as we go. All right, so we have Hillary from South Africa. So my co-founder for Heptio, Craig, he grew up in South Africa. Let's see, and so Mohammed from Morocco. Good to see you. All right, one of the other things that we like to do as we start these things out is go through a little bit of what's been happening around the Kubernetes ecosystem, announcements, new things. And so that's what we're going to start with. So the first thing, and all these links are in that HackMD, and all these links are things that we'll be able to talk about. And you can find them later. So the first thing is that Steve, who's on the line here, who's in the comments, just posted this thing deploying sort of blue-green deployments using Contour's ingress route. So Contour is a project that VMware and Heptio are leading. It's essentially an ingress controller built on top of Envoy, not a service mesh, but very much focused on that north-south load balancing situation with a focus towards working in multi-team environments, being respectful of namespaces. And so one of the things that we're introducing is a set of CRDs that move beyond ingress called ingress route. I think we've talked about those before, but here Steve went into some detail, has a great video talking about how you can use some of the features of Contour to do blue-green deployments in a very easy to understand way. So very cool. Thanks for doing that, Steve. We won't make you watch the video live through this video. We can play a video through a video. All right. All right. So the next one is that Cryo. So this is the common runtime interface for OCI. That's what Cryo stands for. And OCI is the Open Container Initiative. So it's common runtime interface for the Open Container Initiative. Oh yeah, so Steve's saying that we just patched Contour for the new Envoy there was a CVE out there. We're going to talk about that with respect to Istio in a second. So this is an alternative to using Docker for your runtime. And so what we're seeing emerge in this space, the big players, is that we have legacy Docker, sort of driving Docker, which is really a full experience with an engine buried underneath it. We're moving towards Containerd and Cryo being the common runtimes. They're both maturing. Containerd is sort of that engine underneath Docker without a lot of the other sort of user-facing stuff on top of it. And then Cryo is based on a set of other technologies. A lot of this is being driven by Red Hat, and they're kind of peers to each other. The other player in the space a while ago was Rocket. Rocket is kind of fading to the background. Unclear exactly what's going to happen there. And then let's see. So Lamati say, do you see a rosy future for Docker? I mean, I don't know. I mean, like I hear, it's so hard to tease apart like who's making noise in the community, who's popular, who are people talking about. That's all great, but that's different from building a business. And I think it's important to recognize that we can all get together and say, hey, we're really excited about a technology, we're really excited about this stuff. Turning that into something where people are paying you money for goods and services over a long time, it's really a different thing. And I think what we're seeing with Docker now is a real focus to a real shift to be able to focus on building a business out of it. And the rumors that I've heard is that they're building a real business and they're finding customers and they're being successful there. So I think that's good for them. I'm happy. It's definitely been an exciting ride to get to where we're at. All right, so that's Cryo. So now that joined the CNCF at the incubator level. There's 3 levels with the CNCF. There's Sandbox, very low bar to get in, just providing some support so that people can have a neutral ground to be able to develop and sort of kindle a community. There's incubation, which is sort of more support, and then there's graduated, which is a fully graduated project of the CNCF. Let's see. So we have Rory from Scotland, Dare from saying hi, and then Nick from just down the way as Nicholas is here with us also. All right. So let's see. Here's a great article talking about benchmarking CNI over very fast networks, looking at different CNI implementations, looking at some of the pros and cons, talking about things like MTU. So this is an updated version. Looks like there's lots of great info here. Let's see. So there's that. This is another project that has just joined the CNCF at the sandbox level. It's called Network Service Mesh. It's different from sort of the L7 service mesh. This is actually service mesh at the L2, L3 layer. The idea here is that Kubernetes tries to make networking super simple, but in some ways perhaps it's an oversimplification for some use cases. So the idea with network service mesh is that you can start creating sort of virtual wires between, patch cables between containers. And then as you do so, those actually manifest as new interfaces inside the containers. And so this layer is on top of regular networking in an extensible way. So we're not reinventing networking for Kubernetes, but instead this is a way to start taking advantage of, hey, I have this pod, it needs its regular environment, but it also needs access to maybe sort of like back to a corporate VPN. You can then use this to say, well, create another interface, create another wire back to the corporate VPN. A lot of telcos have very specialized needs in terms of dealing with data at a more primitive layer than just TCP streams. And so that's where this comes in. This is coming in at that sandbox level. So that very sort of incubation level, low bar to get in there, but it's a project that I sponsored into the CNCF. I think is really interesting. Let's see other stuff. So Syd Cluster Lifecycle. This is something where a lot of folks at VMware are super involved in. This is this morning we had an onboarding call, sort of like welcoming new contributors into the SIG. Here's a really bad screen capture of Tim. And and so that was really successful. A lot of people joined both on YouTube and on the Zoom call. It was really great to see that. So if you're interested in sort of seeing what it's like to contribute to Kubernetes, get involved in a SIG, this is a great place to start to get an idea for that. Let's see, there's a survey here on sort of Windows use cases. I haven't actually gone through the survey, and it just sort of starts asking for your name, but George found this out and has some context on that. There's a great article here talking about pod security policies. This is not something that we've done a TGIK on yet, and I think it would be a great topic, something I'd really like to get to at some point. There's an update to Istio because there were a couple of CVEs, a couple of security vulnerabilities in Envoy, and the way that Istio was using these things tickled them. And so if you're running Istio, this is something that you want to take pretty seriously and go ahead and update. And then like Steve said, we've updated Contour for this also. And let's see, so let me keep moving. We're moving fast here. Here's a page. We're getting excited, getting prepared for KubeCon in Barcelona. I'm going to be there. Brian Lyles, one of the engineers here at VMware, was helped to actually put the thing together as a program chair. And so we have a ton of stuff going on there, and we're also going to be doing more TGIK Live, which means that with this sort of interactive format, we're going to be doing that live. We can have some more audience participation, that type of stuff. Really excited about that. So you can go here and see like all the different folks who are talking, all the things that we're looking at doing. Super exciting stuff there. And I'm really excited this page came together nicely. All right, so the other things I wanted to call attention to is there's these couple of, this is a project that an engineer at Pivotal, I believe, put together. Called YTT. This is a templating engine for YAML. It's a really interesting take on it. It's in some ways it's a little bit of a spin on JSONet. It uses for its templating language, it uses this sort of Pythonic subset of Python called Starlark that was built for Bazel, the build system, and essentially threads that through into this stuff using comments in YAML. So it kind of feels like a real language, so you're not learning a new language if you're familiar with Python. But then it provides sort of structure-aware for templating of this stuff, which I think is super interesting. We're going to talk about sort of the different ways. And then paired with that, so this just does templating, this file, one of these files in, YAML out, that type of thing. And then there's a better sort of applier. So that you can think of this as sort of a super version of kube control apply called KApp. That gives you a lot of this. And this, I think, if you see a screen like this, this is reminiscent to me of what you'll get out of using Terraform or perhaps out of the Pulumi stuff. We did an episode on Pulumi as an example there. I think that's super interesting, bringing some of that experience to sort of a native, YAML Kubernetes flow. I haven't played with this stuff deeply yet. This is the type of thing that I think I'd love to do an episode on also at some point. So Starlark and YAML comments. So it's a really interesting combination there. And then, these are things that I had left open as I was getting ready. Okay, cool. So that is sort of my, and then there was, let's see, somebody it was Martin posted a link here in the comments. Let me pull this up. Which is looking at Helm versus Kustomize, very topical to what we're going to be talking about today. So I'm going to grab this link and throw this into our notes here because I actually have, let's see, Helm versus Kustomize. I can't type. Yeah, so thanks for that link, Martin. Martin, were you the author for this? Did you write this? Are you like digging into this? Oh, this is Matt's. Oh, I didn't know this was Matt's. Okay, so cool. This is Matt looking into it. Matt Farina. Okay, cool. So I know Matt. Let's see. Yeah, there's a picture of Matt. So he's at Samsung. I can probably see their office from here. I think they're still there. So cool. All right. Let's see. Saeed's asking, what's the history behind API version? Was it originally envisioned as the way to extend Kubernetes? That's a good question. I think let's go into that. I'll give you an answer now. I think we knew that we were going to have more and more resources over time. We knew that we wanted to have a way to version APIs. Some of these lessons we had learned already with GCP, and we were applying those things, GCP and GCE, forward. The internal API infrastructure at the time when we were coming up with Kubernetes had their own idea of like how do we version schemas for APIs, how do we version APIs. Borrowed a lot of ideas from that, and that really turned into the API version and the kind stuff. I think we've learned lessons along the way. I'm not necessarily the person to go through every blow by blow of how that stuff happened, but we started off with just the core thing, and then we realized that we're going to have evolutions of different sets of APIs over time, and that's really where this stuff came out of. I believe the first versions of Kubernetes didn't actually have that API stuff, and so some of the types that we have still are part of core, and core doesn't actually have a specified sort of namespace on the API type. So yeah. All right, so let's go ahead and get started, and we'll start digging in to Kustomize and what Kustomize is. And so we'll start out looking at Kustomize.io. So this is a landing page. Now, the status of Kustomize is really interesting. It started as a sort of side project out of some ideas as we talk about templating. What is the right thing to do? Should we do templating, not templating? Looking at the larger issues around, how does kube control apply, evolve, and so it was started as a sub project of SIG CLI, and it went through a couple of name changes. And with version 1.14, it's been merged into kube control in a pretty interesting way. And so it's gone from being sort of a standalone tool to something that's built into kube control. Now, this is not without controversy. And I have some links in the notes. I'm not going to dig into this. There is some drama over it. Yeah, so I can talk about sort of why I think there was drama. So the first thing to recognize is that this is a place where there's like 1,000 ways to skin this cat. And I have to admit that like the way that Kustomize solves some of these problems is not my favorite way of going about doing this. And I'll try and call attention sort of as we go through it, some of the sort of pros and cons to the approach that Kustomize is taking. I look at the problem that Kustomize is solving, and my take on it is that there is no one-size-fits-all solution. I think that we can probably come up with solutions that'll work for a lot of users, and maybe Kustomize is that solution. Bringing strong opinions, and Kustomize is an opinionated solution, and building it into the default tool, which is kube control. And I think some people view kube control as being a non-opinionated, just hey, apply some YAML type of thing. It feels like a mismatch. It feels like we're injecting a bunch of opinionated workflow into something that was a relatively raw, unopinionated tool. And it really comes down to the definition of like, what is the purpose of kube control? How does it move forward? Do we want to bless one solution for this? Is Kustomize at the same level as other solutions like Helm or KSonnet or JSonnet or the YTT stuff? And there aren't clear answers to a lot of this stuff. So I think a lot of the drama was having to face the question of what exactly is the role of kube control moving forward. So that was one reason why there's drama there. The second reason why is that I think some folks felt that this was snuck in without actually going through a lot of vetting across the larger community. And so there's an article the blog post that I put in the notes that really goes through a bunch of the play-by-play here with some links and stuff. The idea being here that one of the things that we're working from the steering committee point of view is to really make sure that impactful decisions, things that really change the direction or architectural changes or big feature adds, get wide viewing, a lot of eyes on it before they go ahead and get implemented. And I think some folks felt like this sort of snuck up on them and they didn't see this happening. So to solve this across the Kubernetes community, one of the things that we're introducing is this KEP process, Kubernetes Enhancement Proposals. To make matters worse, the KEP process itself is a work in progress. And so there's been a bumpy road to get to the point where that's smooth, it's useful, it doesn't feel like it's a lot of friction for the sake of friction for folks. And so some of this is that some of the early customized stuff maybe didn't use a KEP. When they started using a KEP, KEPs are kind of a pain in the ass. We need to make them better. We're still rolling out new processes. We don't want to change the goalposts on folks when they're in the middle of something like, hey, I was doing something, now this KEP thing came along, now I have to do a bunch of work when I thought I had approval to make stuff happen. So a lot of this is just, fast-moving project, a lot of stuff going on. Now, the other thing that I think is really interesting here is that we've really tried to make Kubernetes from the governance of the project be something that's well federated. And so if there's something that's fully within the purview of one of the SIGs, it's up to the SIG to make those decisions. And so I think one of the things that we've seen with Kustomize is that there's a lot of people with opinions here, but they don't necessarily have skin in the game. They're not actually in the SIG doing the work, making it happen. I'm one of those, right? I've shown up to SIG CLI meetings, but at the end of the day, I'm busy. I haven't been actually putting my work in. So at some certain point, I want to be I may not, if I were going to do it, maybe this isn't the way it would have ended up, but I'm not the one doing it, so I can't say, hey, nobody else should do it until I actually find time to do this, right? And so I think some of this is testing that, hey, if a SIG is driving something, it's part of that SIG, well, it's up to the SIG to figure that stuff out. Another example is Syd Cluster Lifecycle. That's a place where we are, as a company, VMware is putting a lot of time into that. We're showing leadership there, which means that as we go through and as we marshal that community to do things like kubeadmin and cluster API, there's going to be opinions. There's going to be decisions that may be controversial, but at the end of the day, it's the folks doing the work that get to make those decisions. And I think Kustomize is a great example of that. So that's the drama. That's my sort of hey, it may not be the way I would have done it, but I'm not the one doing it. So that's kind of it is what it is. So so that's I think we're moving past the drama. It's never going to be over completely, but if as we say in the open source world, PR is accepted, right? If you want to change the trajectory of this stuff, roll up your sleeves and get involved, and folks would love to have you. All right, so that's my deep analysis of that. Anyway, so with Kubernetes 1.14, it's built in to kube control. There's a little bit of marketing going on here. Now, in terms of documentation, there's two places where you're going to see documentation. There is the repo for Kustomize, and that has both a docs folder that has some really sort of raw documentation along with some examples. And the examples have sort of varying degrees of sort of explanation of what's going on. And then the other place where you're going to find documentation is in the upstream kube control docs, which is kubecontrol.docs.kubernetes.io. Now, Phil, who is the chair, I believe the chair for SIG CLI, has been doing a really good job of actually writing docs for a lot of the projects that he's involved in. So I don't know if he wrote this, but I definitely see sort of his fingerprints on this, which I think is awesome, because this is the new documentation for kube control is really, really good in terms of the description. Now, it's really good, but it also makes the assumption that Kustomize is the preferred way to use kube control, which again I think is controversial, because you'll see things like as we look at apply here, it'll say things like it is recommended to run apply against customization.yaml. A lot of the other stuff here talks about customize as being the thing that goes on. Yeah, and it has a great logo. We have a octopus / cuttlefish here. I think it's a cuttlefish with 7 arms. Of course it will have 7 arms, yeah. So this is great documentation. It goes through a lot of the features of Kustomize and how it works. And so let me sort of like I've been reading up on it. So I can tell Phil wrote the docs. This looks like it's probably write the docs as the thing to generate it also. I'm not sure. It definitely has that look to it. And Phil, if you think I'm getting the story about the drama wrong, feel free to correct me in the comments and tell me I'm off base here. Because Phil was at the center of that drama, dealing with the backlash there. But I think we're getting to the other side of it, which is really good. All right, so the idea here is that we have kube control apply with -f, where you can point it at a directory of YAML. That YAML then goes through and says and pushes that out to the cluster. That is sort of the basis of Kustomize, is that I have a directory of YAML, I want to push it out. But what we find is that, hey, sometimes I want to do a little bit of mucking with that YAML. And the question is that do I want to move to something that's a full templating solution, or are 90% of the mucking with the YAML that users want to do something that we can actually make a really easy experience? And then do we have an escape valve for mucking with that YAML in a structured way without sort of parameterizing everything? And what I'm going to do here is let's look at a Helm chart, because I actually said, hey, let's convert something to Kustomize, and I was actually going to take the cert manager from JetStack, and I was going to be like, what does it take to actually convert that to Kustomize? And I actually think it's probably too much to do for this particular episode, because I think it's really in depth. But as I'm looking through like the cert manager chart here, it's actually a couple of subcharts. There's some issues around sort of like setting up webhooks with authentication, which is a total pain in the ass because they have a validating admission controller here. Last 2 TGIKs, we've done that manually. Cert Manager does that automatically. There's a lot of backflips to be able to do that, which really, to me, points that there's a usability hole in Kubernetes around authentication. Different discussion, though. But if we look at this, I'm going to look at the main deployment YAML template for Cert Manager. And I think what you'll find here is that almost every value here is a template parameter. This is painful. I mean, like, using Helm charts like this and using these templates is actually a decent experience. Authoring these things can be really, really, really painful. And you can see that, like, there's all sorts of, here we have some templates, sub-templates. Here we're like taking stuff and there's like this, hey, I need to indent stuff. And I don't actually off the top of my head understand the difference between n indent and indent. So this is using Golang templates, which is a textual-based templating language against YAML, is painful. Doing templating in general is the only way to be able to sort of take something and parameterize it. Leads to the point, especially when you're doing it for a wide audience, where you create values for pretty much everything that anybody ever might want to customize. Okay, so Syd is saying that there's some regressions in Cert Manager 07, which is something I wasn't aware of. So I'm not going to do Cert Manager today, but I'm using this as an example. Let's see. So Ferdinand says, think that painful, try implementing template function. Your eyes will start bleeding. Yeah. Yeah. But the idea is that, like, once you want to do label requirements, RBAC, that type of stuff, it gets like, that's where you end up with you start with a simple Helm chart. The more people that use it, the more they're like, hey, I love your Helm chart, but I want to tweak it this way. I love your Helm chart, but I want to tweak it. Every time somebody says something like that, you add another parameter, you add more sort of spaghetti to the templating, and you end up with something that eventually looks like this. The Nginx Helm chart is another great example of that. And so Kustomize is really a reaction to this. And I think what we'll find is that as we go through here, and if we were going to say, what are the sort of parts of this template that people will change the most? Can we make those easy? And then can we provide a way for people to change the parts of the template that they don't want to? So as I go through this, things like the name, well, yeah, I'm going to change it. The namespace, all the metadata here, like labels, like, number of replicas is something that actually Kustomize doesn't make super easy, but I think is probably pretty common. It's going to be interesting to see how Kustomize evolves for that. Just labels that people are using. Something like the rollout strategy for the deployment. That's probably going to be a rarely modified thing. I think most folks will be like, whatever, I'm going to take the default. Again, more labels, annotations. Service account name, probably most folks are going to be happy with the default there. Like things like priority class, default, the security context, all this stuff. And then you get down to the image. The image is going to be something that a lot of folks are going to want to customize, especially if you're using it for your own stuff versus a public release. And so I think what's interesting, poll policy, most folks are going to actually be happy with the common thing there. But like this is the type of thing where like every little parameter then gets updated. So this is the first thing that I think is really interesting here. That the first observation is that templating with values turns into spaghetti, like what you see with Helm charts, because everything becomes a variable that gets input. But the usage of those things probably follows a sort of a what do you call it, like a zip distribution, right? Where it's like there's a few types of values that get used by most people, and then there's just a long tail of stuff that's very rarely customized. So that's where Kustomize is coming from. So the idea here is that you take a directory of YAML and then you add a manifest file on it that provides a little bit more context. And the first thing that does is that it explicitly lists out all the YAML files that are there. Because I think when you're doing this directory of YAML, it's easy to accidentally get something included or not included. And then you can do some really interesting stuff. You can be like, hey, override the namespace across all these things. Now, one of the things I don't know, because I haven't actually played with it, is that, and this isn't clear in the docs, Phil, if I already have the namespace in this YAML, will this modify and override it? Or does this only apply the namespace if there's not already a namespace? Things like labels. This says, hey, add a label to every resource. And so if you do something like this, then you're going to go through and let's see. And then you can go through, you can either do a kube control apply -k, but there's also another operation that says just render the YAML that I'm about to apply. So that's like, that gets a lot of the customization that folks are going to want to do out of the way. Similarly, here's another thing that's super painful when you're managing YAML. And we've seen this when I've done this in the past, is that config maps and secrets. Most of the time, you're going to want to have the file that your config map is using sitting on disk right next to the So Mike here, I just saw this, says that templates were really complex for our workflow. So I think here's so Mike wrote, looks like, I don't have time to dig into it right now, like another templating tool. And I think this is what we find, is that folks will do something special purpose for them, which I think is great. That's part of the power of Kubernetes. But I think a lot of folks want to, don't want to have to write their own tool, right? But I think that's part of the drama, is like, hey, part of the conflict is that, like, should there be one built in, or do we want to actually do something that is, make people pick a solution? Okay, so config map. So the idea is most of the time, your config map, you're going to have a file next to your stuff. You want to edit that file. You want it to automatically be created into the, imported in the YAML, generated out of your file, versus actually having to do that step manually. Similarly with secrets with the base64 encoding. And so, so there's support built into Kustomize for being able to do that. Say, create a config map from these files, which is different from, hey, I have a config map in a YAML file that I have to sort of hand edit to be able to do it. Super useful thing to be able to do there. Along the way, one of the things that Kustomize does is, and we can sit down and demo this in a second. One of the things that Kustomize does is that it gives a unique name to the config map and the secret based on the contents in the config map and the secret. And then if you reference those things, it actually updates those reference. And so what that does is it logically makes the config map, say, a child of your deployment. So when you change your config map, it actually causes a re-roll of the deployment. That doesn't happen naturally unless you're using something like this. So that's super useful. That being able to use a config map of a child logically as a child of a deployment versus something that's a peer of the deployment is something that's super, super useful. Super easy to update the container images, namespaces and names. We talked about that, labels and annotations. And then there's some other support for, this is like advanced sort of like how kube control apply works. Now, if you go down to, in this documentation here, to app customization, now what we can start doing is you can have a base, and then you can have files that say, okay, I'm not using those common sort of things that change the YAML. I want to do something a little bit more complicated. And to do that, what you can do is you can specify essentially a diff on top of these things. And there's different types of strategies for doing the diffs. And that's where that sort of patching semantic comes into play. So here's, some of the documentation there. And then finally, there is this thing, it's called config reflection. This is templating. Now, I was talking with Phil about this before the episode, but at the end of the day, what this is saying I want to take some value out of one part of my YAML. I want to turn that into a variable that I can then inject into another part of my YAML. So it's essentially being able to create references from one place to another so that you're not repeating yourself. And so you end up with this stuff like this here, where you have this $sign, and this is actually done, this replacement of this YAML is actually done by the Kustomize tool. And so this really is starting to go down the path towards templating. Now, the intent is not to make this a general sort of variable type of thing, but I think it's going to be interesting in my mind to see whether people take this capability and start abusing it over time, because I could definitely see that happening. Let's see, Lee says, note that config map secret rolling update via names is a common valuable use case, but you actually don't want that when your app dynamically updates. Yes, that's a really good point. So one of the things that you can do here, and I'm trying to think, okay, so the other really interesting piece of documentation here, if you go into the docs file of the Kustomize GitHub, is that there's a customization.yaml, which is a fully annotated everything that you ever might want to set in customization.yaml. And one of the things that you see here is there's a config map there's a generator options here where you can actually set specific values on the resources generated from the generators. But then also you can do this disable name suffix hash, which actually says, okay, I don't want to treat config maps and secrets as a child of my deployments. I want to treat it as a peer. And so this disables that. So now when you update a config map with this, it won't actually cause a reroll along the way. One of my criticisms, and I think this isn't to some degree, I think it's one of the things I worry about, and I don't know how serious it is. Here, let me make this a little bit. So here's the generator options, disable name suffix hash. So this is a global option for your entire customized deployment. There's no way to say, hey, I want to use the suffix on this config map, but not on this other config map. And I think that's definitely a use case that, I worry that there's an oversimplification by having a lot of global things like this. Similarly, as we look at, when we update images, when we update images, essentially, what we're saying is that if I have an image named Postgres, I want to update it to this new thing with this new tag. I might actually use the same image in different places. Maybe I have a canary and I have a mainline, and that's part of my same thing. I have canarying built into my particular YAML setup. And sometimes those are going to be the same, sometimes they're different. So there's actually no way using this mechanism to be targeted. So you'd have to actually revert to the patching type of mechanism to be able to do this stuff. Let's see. So Dex has posted a link here saying there's some interesting discussion. Is this templating and config reflection in the Kubernetes Slack? Okay, so yes, so that the reflection stuff starts to become templating is something that other folks have actually started to look at also. Yeah, so I think that this is some of the the approach that Kustomize is taking is very much one of let's find the common things, make those super easy. And I think that it does a really good job with that. It's obviously resonating with a lot of folks, but we do end up with, I think, as we start imagining more advanced use cases, like, hey, I have the same image, but I want to use 2 different versions in the same app in the same directory of YAML is not something that it can support easily out of the gate. Similarly with, I want some config maps to have the suffix and some config maps to not. Again, not something that it supports natively and easily. Being able to say, hey, I want to define a rollout strategy for across 5 deployments is not something that it can support easily without resulting to something that starts to look more like templating. Now, the one thing, and I haven't had a chance to dig into this, is that there is a lot of work ongoing to create a plugin model for Kustomize, and I'm going to be interested to see how that works. Essentially taking the ideas around sort of like the secret and the config map generators, how do we make that something that is extensible? So it becomes, and then as part of that, maybe there is a templating engine becomes a plugin that this thing can actually call. So these things aren't always apples to apples as we look at it. Okay, so enough talking. What I'm going to do is I want to actually take some YAML. I want to convert it to Kustomize. I haven't done this before. We'll see what that looks like. There's 2 things that I want to actually be able to get to. The first is I want to deploy Contour so I'm going to take the Contour YAML. I want to convert that to Kustomize. And then I want to actually take a simple application, specifically the demo app I created for Kubernetes up and running, QuarD. Convert that. That's a good place for us to start playing with things like config maps because it lets you introspect and actually see some of that stuff. So that sound good? Should we dig into some code? I've been talking too much here. So what we have here is I have a kube control version. I have kube control 14 with Kustomize built in, going against a 1.13.2 cluster. And this is running the Heptio VMware Quick Start running on AWS. So if I do kube control get nodes, I got a couple of nodes going on here. Nothing super complex. All right, so if I bring up my editor, what you'll see is I have Contour. When we do deployment stuff, the way that we do it is we have different types of deployments, and we end up with, so if we look at the one that I want to do is a daemon set with gRPC, because there's different types of things that we've written here. These end up being some symlinks, and then we actually have a simple script that essentially cats these things together into single YAML files. So this is totally janky. It works for this stuff, but I think it's an example of where you're going to have different ways to deploy something. We didn't want to go down to the path of over-parameterizing, so we actually have different scenarios that people can start with. So the one that I want to do is this, the daemon set RBAC one. So you can actually see here's all the resources that get generated out of this. Doc says updated the doc. So Phil's working on this already to clarify the namespace overrides value here. So what's the answer? So it's like setting the namespace will override the namespace even if it's already set. Okay, yeah, so cool. Because that's something that I'm like, let's test that out and figure it out. So yeah, so this is the janky workflow that we did for Contour. It actually works really well for the type of stuff that we're doing. We did want to create one YAML because we wanted to provide a one-shot kube control apply -f to a URL. But I think, as we look at over time, like people have created Helm charts for Contour, and I think it's going to be interesting to see if Kustomize is something that makes sense here also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all the stuff in this file and I'm going to copy it into a new directory that we can work on. So I'm going to do make dir contour Kustomize. I have a hard time typing Kustomize. Oh, I do copy, contour, deploy, and we're going to do ds grpc v2 here. Oh, what did I do? It's a directory. I have to do star. There we go. All right. So now if we go through and pull up VS Code, let me close this. What we have here is a bunch of boilerplate around CRDs, service accounts, and I think, yeah, because we have two CRDs we're defining plus service accounts. Here's the daemon set for contour. Here's the RBAC definitions, including role bindings and such. And then here's the service for contour. And so we're going to go ahead and we're going to set this up. And then the first thing that we do as we do this is we do a new file called Kustomization.yaml. And I think I saw someplace that there was talk about like making this be more flexible in terms of what it's named. It's interesting that like this is the American with a Z. If you're from the UK or you know, you probably expect an S there. So cultural imperialism going on there. And the common things that we want, we're going to start with the sort of common things here, is we need an API version in kind. So now this is common across everything in the Kubernetes ecosystem. We got a lot of YAML files flying around. The idea here is that we want some standard way to say what kind of YAML file is this, what is the version, and what type of object is it supposed to be. So this is sort of a schema identifier that we got going on here. And so it feels a little bit like boilerplate, but I think, you know, as we evolve these things over time, this is the type of thing where you thank yourself later for doing this stuff. And then we just have our resources going on here. And what we have is I'm going to do o1 common.yaml, o2 common.yaml, o2 rbac.yaml, o2 service.yaml. Now the reason why we did the o1, o2 here was to actually go through and make sure that we had specific order when you actually sort these things. So the common one, this does like the namespace and the service account. You got to do the namespace before you actually do stuff that lands in the namespace. Otherwise, you know, hilarity ensues. So allegedly, this is going to be enough for us to be able to actually set this stuff up. So I can do cube control apply -k dot. Let's see what happens. Boom, we did it. It worked. Cube control. Now the namespace that we're talking about here is Heptio contour. Get pods. Yeah, so there's our daemon set that's initializing, up and running, one on each pod. So that's as easy it is to get started. And this moves you from that sort of directory of YAML to something where we can start doing some more interesting stuff. Now let's say like, you know, heptio.contour, that's the wrong thing. Let's not go ahead and do that. What I can do is I can go through and I want to change the namespace to VMware contour, right? I should be able to do that. I think, is that how it works? Let's see, namespace. Yeah, so I can go ahead and do that. Now, the one thing that I'm wondering here is if I do this, will it actually go through? Does it have enough context to actually realize that it had data from before? It needs to delete those things, then add this? My guess is no. My guess is that we're going to actually have an instance of contour created in one namespace, and then an instance of contour created in another namespace. Abhishek's asking, is Kustomize kind of a replacement for Helm, or does it complement Helm templating? It's sort of another approach to Helm templating, where it tries to take the common things that you do with templating and actually get those with both explicit support with things in the customization.yaml file, plus this ability to do patching that we'll talk about later. And so it's a little bit, I would say, a peer to Helm templating, but there's actually room moving forward for, instead of using patching, to actually use templating in addition to what Kustomize is doing. So at some point, they may be more complementary. Yeah, so Miguel's saying it'll keep everything. So now the first question is like, how do I go ahead and delete stuff once I actually do this? And it turns out if I do cube control delete -k, that's not going to work because it's like, oh wait, it does work. Delete -k works? I didn't know that worked. So yeah, Ross is saying it would be nice if JSON was embedded into kube control instead. YAML coding shows its limitations pretty quickly. Yeah, I think I agree. Like it would be nice if we had that. I think part of the concern here, Ross, is that like JSON specifically is very polarizing for folks. I think some people love it, some people hate it, and I think that's one of the things we're seeing about anything in this space is that it's very polarizing. All right, so here's the problem is I went to go ahead and do this, but I actually already changed the namespace. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to go ahead and do the delete. Nope. Cube control get namespaces. Oh, it deleted the namespace. So how did it know? Did I not hit save? I think I maybe didn't hit save. Because we actually, what did it do? It went through and it deleted the namespace first and then tried to delete other stuff here. All right, so this is a bug. I found my first bug. All right, Phil, when you're doing a delete, you need to actually traverse the graph in the opposite order from when you do a create or an update. So it turns out the delete flow for Kustomize is something that is still very much a work in progress. So Kustomize is a good way to actually bring up new resources. If you find that you have to delete a resource, Kustomize is actually not good at that. And so I'm sure there's active discussions. Previously in Cube Control, there was this feature called Purge, where you could say, hey, across a set of resources with a specific label, if they're not specified in this directory, then I want you to delete them. It's kind of a dangerous thing. So I think people were really scared of that. So Purge never really saw wide adoption because it was a really scary thing to do. A lot of that, being scared of accidentally deleting stuff, a lot of that healthy skepticism is being imported into Kustomize, and it's stuff that folks are looking at. I think an easy thing to do here would be some sort of tombstoning where you could delete something and then actually say, hey, I want to have a delete directive for this thing for this resource in your customization.yaml. I'm sure that there's a lot of folks already talking about this. Okay. So let's see. So I think we're cleaned up now. So let's go through, and now we can go through and we can deploy this thing to VMware Contour. Oh, namespace. Oh, this is the, okay, so this is the next bug, is that if the thing that you're actually creating is a namespace, the namespace override doesn't actually know how to fix that. And I think this is an interesting thing, and you'll see this sometimes when people expect different things from Helm. Do you expect your directory to actually create its own namespace, or should it deploy to a namespace that already exists? So it did not update this one. So I'm going to have to change this explicitly to VMware Contour. So I can go through and do that, and we can play with patching for this stuff in the future. Now we're actually all up and running. We got this stuff going. Yeah. Wait, but now it's a cluster role. Okay, yeah, because these were cluster wide, so they were unchanged. The service got created, everything got created. So now we can do kube control -n VMware Contour get pods, and I see these things up and running. So cool. All right. Now the next thing we can do is we can go through and let's do some labels. So now that's the next thing that we'll go ahead and play with, common labels. App, contour, environment, TGIK. We'll do something like that. Now what you'll find is that there is a pointer here. What was on one of these? Oh, here, label and annotations. there's some common label conventions. These are really interesting. And so I think SIG apps actually help to do this. So there's this idea that we want to find some common labels that folks can use, with the idea that if you see these on resources, they actually start lighting up in UI and stuff. So this is something interesting that you might want to play with and look at. So let me go back to where we were. Okay, so we did the label stuff. So now what I should be able to do is, if I go through, if I do cube control, get pods, grab one of these things, and I can go through and I look at this, the labels that we have, contour, control, so we have app contour is what we got going on here already. So Miguel says, yeah, Andrew's saying, okay, so Andrew's saying that I could add another base resource in the customization YAML with the new namespace to pull that in, so you can actually compose some of the sort of directories that you're merging. Then Miguel says namespace creation is tricky. If you add a prefix to all resources, it actually adds the prefix to the namespace that you declared to. So you need to keep the namespace and the prefix in sync. Okay, yeah, no, that does sound like it could be a little bit tricky. Okay, app is my contour because I want to change it just to see the change. Okay, so if I do Y, does it show the labels? No. There's some flag for showing labels. You can do label columns. There's selector. I thought there was, oh, show labels. There we go. Yeah, so there we go. We got the labels going on. Does it catch the case that label change invalidates service or network policy selectors from the same apply? One of the things that, so I don't know exactly, but one of the things that I think is important to recognize about Kustomize is that it is schema aware. So it knows that, hey, if I change the name of the, this particular config map, I know that, hey, this thing is actually referring to a config map. Let me actually go through and update those things. So it is schema aware in that way. And so when we go through and actually specify a bunch of common labels here, it'll modify not just the labels, but also the selectors for those labels. I suspect, but I don't know for sure, that that also means that it would modify the selectors for the network policies. But that's something that I need to, I think we'd want to actually dig into and test out. It's an interesting use case. Now, one of the things that I think you see here is with common labels, there's a way, or maybe it's not. So with bases and variations, there's a way to say whether you're overwriting these things or whether you're just augmenting them. And I'm not sure if that's a, I don't know if that's a common labels thing. Okay, but let's go ahead and do this. So now what we're saying is we're going to add a new label because we don't have an end label yet, and we're going to change the app label to my contour. We're going to go through and do apply-k. This went through, did a reconfigure of everything, including the namespace. Cube control -n VMware contour. We'll look at the pods. Show labels. All right, interesting. This didn't re-roll. So Shahar says Helm still has the concept of tiller, and Helm does Kustomize also need a server and a client component? No, I think folks in general, including the next version of Helm, Helm v3, we're moving away from specialized server components here. And when we do need special server-side work, we're actually trying to do it in a way that is very much friendly with upstream. So like a lot of the apply stuff that's happening here, there's this stuff that API Machinery has been working on really hard called server-side apply. That's going into alpha, I believe, in the next release in 1.15. I think that's where it is. They just gave an update at the community meeting. Daniel did. So there's some details there. Okay, so I didn't see, so did this get, let's actually see, get daemon set, show labels. So the daemon set got app contour, but it actually didn't cause a re-roll. let's see. So we have match. This may be. So daemon set maybe maybe this is an issue with daemon set where daemon set doesn't do a reroll on a label change. That is fascinating. Is that a bug? Yeah, interesting. I'm wondering what's going on here. I would have expected that the pods would get updated. What's going on? Oh, fascinating. All right, so this is interesting. So what happened is that we changed the selector on the labels. And so this is actually one of those things where you may want to add a label to a particular, as a bunch of labels, but you may not want to change your selectors. You may want to just additively add stuff, but not change the selectors. Because what happened is because I changed the selector that was used, it actually started a new copy of all of those pods. Because we applied it, it created, it essentially reconfigured the daemon set that said, hey, I'm now like, that daemon set is associated with pods in a different way. And as it did so, it sort of orphaned those other pods because now there's no controller in charge of these two pods. And so we now have to go. So this is those things, as you change selectors on things like daemon sets and deployments, you got to be really, really careful. And was there a warning in the docs about that? I wonder. I think I remember seeing that, Phil. Let's see. Yeah, this could be a total like shoot yourself in the foot type of thing here. So you got to be careful when you're changing those. I'm trying to remember. I thought I saw that there might have been a warning on that. Okay, so that is definitely a little bit of a sharp edge there. Cube, control, delete, pod, and we'll just delete these manually. Oh, actually we'll do delete pod and we do -L app equal contour. That should work. What is it? Is it dash delete? Oh, you didn't put the namespace there. And VMware contour. All right. Yeah, the namespace. You guys are way ahead of me here. All right, so that'll actually go through and actually delete those. Okay, so now I have those two pods. We're up and running. Okay, so that's sort of the basics of what we can do here. Now let's go through and let's see. Like one of the things that we could do, actually let's play with this with the application here because I don't want to actually go through. So one of the things that I wanted to say is that there's a great example of using Kustomize with something complex like Cert Manager. And so JetStack has a post here talking about this with some examples. I wanted to go through this, but I didn't have time to actually really get everything set together. The interesting thing is that they start with a base, which is just a plain old sort of thing, ingress, no TLS, and then they layer on Cert Manager usage on top of this, where they actually have a version, an overlay that is for production that uses maybe Let's Encrypt, but then they have a version for, say, development that uses a self-signed cert. So I think that's really interesting. Okay, so yeah, we can do the set context with VMware Contour for sure. So that's what we go here. Okay, so that's so I think this is a good example of sort of like how you can take a core application and then customize it in different ways using overlays. So let's go through. Let me close some stuff up here. So that's that blog post. It's in the notes if you want to find it. Couple of other things that I want to actually call out here that I think we might have time to play with. We did the common label stuff, similar stuff with annotations. It's not going to modify the selector, so no big deal. You specify your resources. There is the config map generator, the secret generator. We talked about that stuff. There's bases here. So this is the idea that, like, hey, it turns out that this particular directory is a delta on top of this other particular customized base. And so it's like Kustomize can layer on top of other customized setups. And so this is, and you can do that either within a customized thing where you can actually have overlays that are built into it for different environments, but you can also actually have the bases done this way. So so oftentimes people will set up a directory structure where they're like the base is like ... or something like that. I believe that's how it works. One of the things that confuses me is that you can have these things be GitHub links or Git links. The problem is that what if I have a directory called github.com? How does this thing know that I'm actually talking about a network resource versus a directory? I personally would really like to see this be a explicit, you know, like, I mean, you could do something like, you know, like a CSS URL paren, right? And I think that's unique enough that you're not going to have a file with parens in it like that. I mean, maybe you would, but I would love to see something that was more explicit than just saying, hey, that looks like a domain, let's go. So Nick says, I think it supports that too. Okay, so maybe, because like this kind of gives me the heebie-jeebies because we're mixing two types here. Okay, you can do file : or HTTPS : that type of thing. There's also like, there's danger here too, because like Docker created problems with themselves initially because similarly, they supported registries. They didn't specify TLS or no TLS. They would actually do either. It led to a lot of insecurity. And so there was like early on in Docker, it took for freaking ever to get to the point where everything was now over HTTPS for this stuff. But like, yeah, git : git, you know, sort of URL would help there. And then there's these merge things where it's essentially I'm taking my resources, I'm merging on top of it. There's two different strategies here. We can go into some details on that. You can specify CRD schemas. Like I said, Kustomize is schema aware. And so that means that when you're using CRDs, you actually need to be able to import the schema. So it ends up being open API with some annotations about sort of like, hey, if this is an object ref, what is the type of ref? So that it knows, hey, this is a secret. I need to go ahead and rewrite that name in a certain way. Then there's the variables and the image stuff that we had talked about. Yeah. Okay. So let's go through and let's do QRD, which is my thing here, and we're gonna go from scratch here. And so if we look here, like our YOLO way to run this stuff is like this, that runs a single pod. And this is a great sort of like just getting started type of thing. But what we have here is we have the image. And so I'm going to do kube control, like create deployment. Okay, so here's something else that I'm gonna bitch at Phil about. Kube control run. And we want to do image equals this. No, I don't want to. What did I do wrong here? So we can do dry run YAML. This is a way to sort of generate YAML off the. So this will actually gives you a message saying, hey, kube control run is deprecated. But it turns out that there's a lot of stuff you can do with kube control run. The preferred way to do this is kube control create, but you can't do everything with kube control create that you can do with kube control run. So especially around exposing ports and stuff. But we'll deal with that later. But I can do kube control create deployment, and we're gonna call it QRD image equals blah. Oh no. How come I copied that? That's not what I wanted. Kube control, create, deploy, mint QRD, image equals. I keep doing my my swipe versus not. Try run. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to redirect that to a file called it deployment.yaml. Okay, we're going to touch Kustomization.yaml. Hopefully I spelled that right. We're going to go into our edit here. We have Kustomize. Yeah, I'm going to remove some stuff that's just kind of like bogus that I don't need. And this should be good enough to go. We have app, this, blah, 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 creation timestamp. Okay, and then customization.yaml. Oh, that's the previous one, but I'm going to copy this stuff here. And we're going to edit this customization.yaml. Resources, deployment.yaml. Okay, so I think that should work. So I can do cube control apply -k this. And we now have that. It's running cube control get pods. Okay, so now we got that running. So that was essentially, table stakes getting this stuff set up. The next thing we're going to do is let's create another resource here. We'll call this service.yaml. Cube control create service. And it's, okay, we want let's do just a cluster IP type. -h for help. I haven't done this in a while, so because I always use expose. And then we're going to do quard and OYAML dry run. Oh, it must specify at least one port. So TCP equals 8080 8080. All right. So, and we're going to send that to, so let's see, so we say, okay, related to deprecating krun is deprecating k get -- export. Okay. Yeah, -- export did a bunch of stuff to sort of like strip a bunch of fields that you probably don't care about, but it was implemented server side in a weird way. So I actually think that one's probably good to deprecate. I don't know whether it's like you deprecate these things, like it's hard to get every single use case actually nailed down on that though. But if you do want to export stuff like that, I suggest you look at something like Valero, which is what we renamed Arc2, which is sort of a backup thing that also supports doing like a smart sort of transitive closure of capturing all the stuff in a namespace. All right, so I'm going to do this too. Oh wait, where am I typing? Service.yaml. So I have this. If I look at service.yaml, let's see, what do we have here? So then the selector, I think it assumes that the app is quard based on the name. What I wonder, or does it actually do a get to be able to do that stuff? Because we haven't. This is create service. So if I do foo, oh yeah, it assumes that it's quard. Okay. So yes, this is actually fascinating. So create service just assumes that there's a convention that you're going to have the service name the same thing as the app that you're dealing with. So if we wanted to call this instead quard service, it would assume that the app is called quard service. But it turns out that if you just name these things the same thing, this will actually all just work out just fine. Let's see, we'll name this HTTP. The selector should probably be up here. And we don't want a status on that because we don't need a status. Okay. Yeah, so that's so that should be up and running. And so then we're going to do service.yaml. And we can go ahead and apply that. Now, one of the things I might want to do is, and then let's do an ingress. Okay, so do we have cube control create ingress? Do we have that? There is no create ingress. Ingress is a second-class citizen in the Kubernetes world. So now I have to go through and actually do the copy-paste thing that everybody else in the world does. Ingress Kubernetes, and we're not gonna go through and actually. I don't have domain mapped now, so we'll do a single service ingress like this for contour. So. QuarD, backend is QuarD, service port 8080. That should work. All right, so this, and then I kind of don't like that you can't just drop files. You have to actually list them in the resources. That feels like it's not quite dry, you know, don't repeat yourself. But I think but it also is very explicit, which I also do like. So I kind of like it and I kind of don't like it. All right, so now we created the service, the ingress, kube control, and VMware contour get service. We have, this is the ELB that we got. It says it's not working. Why isn't it working? There we go, boom. So now we got QuarD up and running. This is great. We got all of the, customize, edit, add resources, start.yaml. Oh, okay, can we do that? Customize, edit. Okay, so this is the other thing. So I installed the Kustomize tool with brew, install, customize. I did that earlier today. But if I do kube control customize dot, that actually says do a render of it. This actually outputs all the stuff and like runs the thing to output the YAML. The kube control customize is not the same as the customize command, I don't think. So if I do edit, does that work? So if I do kube customize edit, it thinks I'm trying to do a render of that. So like there is like, I think there's functionality in the customize command that's not built into kube controller. At least that's what it looks like. So I'm still figuring that out. Because like I don't think kube customize edit actually made its way into kube control. So yeah, all right, so now we got that up and running. We're going through ingress. We got the whole thing set up. That is awesome. One of the things that I think we have here is a file system browser where we can look at this. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna actually, let's create a config map. And so, because I wanna play with that. So where is our documentation? Secrets and config map. What we're going to go through is we're going to use the config map generator, which is going to be interesting. So we're going to do config map generator. So QuarD CM, and we'll do the literal thing just to, actually let's do it from a file. QuarD config, something like that. I'll now create a new file, QuarD.config, and do, let's see, oh, it thinks it's XML. That's what VS Code thinks. And then we'll put something clever in here. This is something clever. And so now, if I do this, I think what we find is, if I do kube control customize dot, what we're going to find is that we end up with a config map that has the contents of that file imported into it, and then it gets this unique name. And I haven't referenced it anywhere, but this still works. So this is the config map generator working, loading stuff from file, making it into a config map. It assumes, maybe rightly so, maybe not, that that the name of the file on disk is the name of the file that you're going to want in the config map. There is room to map this stuff around, but it looks like the generator doesn't support that. This becomes especially critical when you're actually talking about TLS secrets, because okay, so these things is pulling it from a subdirectory, because a lot of times you'll have like, oh, here's my CA, here's my client cert, my server cert. You'll name those different things, but actually, as you import them into a secret, you'll actually rename them in the secret versus not. So this actually implies a certain level of layout on disk that may not actually be the same for you, may not be the right thing for you. So you can't do that remapping. That's probably okay, but it's just a little. It's again another degree of freedom that Kustomize doesn't offer, that you can get with other workflows. Okay, so we got that up and running. Now let's go ahead and mount that secret into. And again, this is the type of thing where config map volumes. We'll go ahead and we'll do that. Configure a pod with a config map. I have to like find the like voodoo here. There we go. Okay. So, because this is the stuff that I forget, and we copy and paste it just like everybody else copies and pastes it. All right, so now I'm going to look at my deployment here. I'm going to go through and the config map. My config map is, what did I call it? I called it QuarDCM. Do this. So that's the okay, yeah. So that maps that into that as a volume. Oh, that's my volumes, and then I have to map that into a container with the volume mount. Say here's where I want this to show up in here. Config volume, and I'm going to actually put that into like QuarDCM. Okay. So if we do this right, what should happen is when we do this, it'll actually cause a re-roll of the of QuarD, and that config map will actually mount in there. So let's go through. We'll do this. Apply-K. Okay, so it says configured here, which means something changed. And now if I go to my browser here, I can go to the file system browser, and here we have QuarDCM. We actually have the config. This is something clever. So this actually pushed that config file out in a way that I can get it. Now here's the magic. Here's some of the magic. So let's look at what happened here. So we remember it gave it a unique name. So we see here that we have, this is actually the name of the config map that got created. It also is schema aware. It knows that, hey, this particular field buried inside of the deployment is a reference to a config map. I want to be able to say, well, that config map is called QuarDCM, but I want to actually append that hash to it. So it's smart enough, it's context aware enough to be able to append that hash. And so that's what we see going on here. And so if I do kube control get config maps, you'll see that there's the particular config map. And I'm getting a spam call. Oh, it's my mom. I'll have to call her back later. And then let's see. And so the next thing we can do is we can go through and edit the QuarD.config. No, I mean really clever. I don't have anything clever to say. Let's see. I know Factorio is a great game. I've been playing a ton of that with my son lately, so I'll do that. And now I'll go through, I'll do the apply again. And what this did is it actually created a new config map. And in doing so, it had to rewrite the deployment, and then that deployment got configured and actually moved. Oh, Miguel, are you lost here? All right, let me explain a little bit more of what's going on. I think let's see what's happening, and then I'll make sure that I really drive this point home. But now I actually go in here and I actually see my config, and my config got updated. Okay, so here's the scenario, and I think this is something that's a little bit magic, and I'll be super. Let me know if you're lost here. Is that a lot of times what will happen is we'll have. So I can create a config map here. Let me do this. I'm going to create a new file here. Oh, not a new folder, a new file called static config map.yaml. Okay, and this is actually, and then what I'm going to do is kube control create config map foo. Oh, I didn't want to. I actually did that on the cluster. so if, actually, like, what do I want to do? Give me a second here. I'm going to copy the config map. All right. So here we have a config map. I'm going to call this static config map. Okay. This won't cause a redeploy. Okay. So now we have this config map. It's called static config map. I think that that's right. Okay. And I'm going to add this to kustomization.yaml. And now when I go through and I actually do a deploy here, oh, format error. Mapping values are not allowed in this context. I screwed up the, what did I screw up here? Kind config map qrd. Give me a second here. I screwed something up. Metadata name. I missed data. Oh, that's the problem that I had there. Okay, so now I go ahead and apply this. And this creates a config map called static config map. Okay, and you'll notice that this doesn't have this gobbledygook at the end here. Whereas the config maps that I generated using using the config map generator that I'm loading from files, those things have this gobbledygook here at the end. Okay, so the question is that do we create a unique name based on the contents of the config map, or do we not? Okay. Now let me go through and I'll actually, I'm going to change the deployment to actually be able to reference both of these config maps. So we have one called config volume, which is the one that we had before. And then we're going to have static config. Static CM. And then we'll mount this in here. Okay. So now we have two config maps. One of them I'm using the config map generator. One of them I'm using a plain old YAML resource. So now I'm going to go through and I'm going to apply that. And now if we do a kube control get deployment qrd, what we'll find here is that the dynamic config map, the one that's generated from the generator, this gobbledygook actually gets written into it, modifies the template of the deployment to include that gobbledygook. Whereas, you know, here with the static config map, it didn't modify anything. There's no gobbledygook, nothing like that. So now if I actually go through and if I do kube control get pods, what I see is that I have a pod here. It's been running for 47 seconds. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through and I'm going to modify the static one. This won't cause a redeploy, really. So now I've modified this. Now if I do an apply here, what happens is that we see that it configured the static config map, but it actually didn't change the deployment at all. So that means it actually didn't cause a re-roll of the deployment. It didn't cause a redeployment of it. So what that says is this pod didn't get restarted. It hasn't been restarted. Nothing changed in that template for the deployment to say, hey, I need to push a new version out. Now, if I do the same thing with a dynamic one, so now let's go through and I change this qrd.config, and I'm going to do another change. What's going to happen here is it's going to, that gobbledygook at the end, that's a hash based on the contents of the config map. So when I change the contents of the config map, it's going to change the hash, that, and then Kustomize is smart enough to actually change that name deep inside of the deployment template. That change will trigger a redeployment and will cause a restart, a rolling restart of all of your application containers. So now when I do this, what we see here is that the deployment is configured here. And now when I go through and I get pods, what I see is that this thing just restarted. You can see it got restarted with a new one. And so the nice thing here is that I can actually have a config map be based on a file being used from a deployment. When I change that config map, it automatically causes that deployment to treat it as an upgrade and actually do a rolling update of it. Now, it turns out that some programs are able to deal with either hitting Kubernetes directly to read that config map. Also, it takes a little while, but Kubernetes does know how to actually update the value of a config map on disk out from under the application. That's the type of thing that more enlightened applications are sort of smart enough to know how to reread their configurations dynamically. A common pattern at Google, not a common pattern outside of Google. So this is a place where sort of Googleisms leaked into Kubernetes a little bit. There are some applications, and I think somebody brought up Traffic, the ingress controller, where they're smart enough to know how to reload their config dynamically from disk. They wouldn't need this capability, but I think most applications, once they read a config file, they really need a restart or at least a re-up to be able to reread the config file. So now one of the things that kubectl get config maps that we see here is that it's leaving all the old config maps around. Yeah, this is problematic. This is something that deployment does something similar to manage sort of child replica sets. And so there was a whole bunch of stuff with deployment about being able to sort of garbage collect old replica sets. So this is a problem here. And I'm kind of wondering whether Kustomize folks actually have an approach to try and deal with this stuff. All right, let me catch up on the comments here a little bit. So Ross is asking about, is there a way to opt out of the hash config map? Yeah, there's a thing, but it does it globally. If you have a horizontal pod autoscaler and in deployment and it's scaled up, it scales back down to the original deployment replicant count, should it? Miguel, it should not. This is actually something that's a subtlety of kubectl apply. And I don't know, did folks actually take that on? Yeah, if you're using HPA, then what you have is that replica count. And let's go back to the documentation, because this is one of those things that makes some of this stuff so freaking complex. And if you look at the documentation here for field merge semantics, that goes into this a little bit. So it says so this thing, motivation here, this talks exactly about that case. It says other fields such as replicas may be owned either by human users, which is where you specified specifically in your deployment, may be owned by either human users, the API server, or controllers. For example, replicas may be explicitly set by user, implicitly set by default value of the API server, or continuously adjusted by HPA, right? And so part of apply is that you have to figure out who actually last touched which field, and when you actually do an apply, do you want to actually stomp over the stuff that things are happening? So a bunch of these sort of apply semantics are to be like, hey, the horizontal pod autoscaler is mucking with that field. I'm going to leave it alone. I'm not going to go ahead and touch it. So that's the real hard part about apply is exactly that case. All right, so Neek says, could disable name suffix hash be done for specific config maps or secrets? Doesn't look like it. I think the right thing to do in that case is to actually use a static resource like I did, not use the generator for your static things. It's a little bit of a bummer that you can't actually be more targeted with that stuff. So Ross is getting some JSONet magic going on there for sure. Do we know if one could use Kustomize inside a CRD to generate, say, deployment objects versus doing it in code? So one of the interesting things here is that, and we saw this pattern at Google, is that as we start seeing something like operators and controllers come into play, they will want to actually manage downstream resources. And so what you find is that something like Kustomize with a bunch of YAML is used by human operators through this, but you may want to actually use it as an API to actually configure your child resources inside of an operator or controller. So I think there's a dual usage there. I don't know. I mean, I'm guessing that you could use Kustomize server side as part of an operator. I don't know if anybody's done that yet. It'd be an interesting thing to be able to code up and play with. I do know that like the parallels for that particular use case inside of Google was with MapReduce. Because what we would do with MapReduce at Google is that you would launch a essentially a seed job into the Borg cluster, and then that would go through and launch all of the mappers and reducers it would need to be able to actually do that. As those did their work, it would actually go through and delete those particular jobs. And so that's very much the operator pattern that we're seeing in Kubernetes. Didn't use CRDs. We didn't have CRDs in Borg, but a lot of sort of echoes of operators or controllers were sort of like used in MapReduce. And as you did that, what you found is that the Borg config language was both usable as a command line, similar to Kustomize, but also could be embedded as a C++ library in Google to be able to run that stuff server side for things like MapReduce. And a lot of the problems of like, what do you actually do with variables? What do you not do with variables? How do you do overrides? All that stuff actually got repeated in the Borg config use cases. Let's see. So Phil, disabling name generation for specific secrets or config maps can be done by putting them in a separate base. The disabling generation for that base. Okay, so this is something where you have to sort of create a different customized base. What do you call like a customized directory? Because I think this was one of those things with KSonnet we had a hard time. Do you call it an app? Do you call it an app config? Do you call it like what do you call it? You guys are calling it a base. So you need a different customization.yaml file for that thing, which means a different directory. If you're familiar with Terraform, it's kind of like putting in a different submodule, I think. Kind of interesting. So that's one way to work with that. So Dex says OPA is promising for patching controller-generated deployments, mutating webhook controllers. I am dubious of server-side mucking with YAML like that. I think that, the problems that we just talked about with HPA mucking with replica set, those things get amplified dramatically as we have more and more things mucking with YAML that you're actually posting. To a certain degree, people build an expectation of when I actually create a resource with YAML and I read it back, the amount of sort of mucking with that is actually going to be kept to a minimum. And when we see things like sidecar injection for things like Istio, oftentimes users don't deal with the pods directly. So like I can write a deployment, I can read the deployment, everything works fine. It's only when the replica set finally creates the pod does that actual injection happen. And so that means that a lot of times there's a sort of a cutout between the deployment and the pod where it doesn't impact users. The more that we have things like mutating emission controllers mucking with YAML, the more I think we're going to break some of the configuration utilities like Kustomize, like Apply. So I think it's a dangerous thing to actually look at. So let's see. So somebody posted a link to Gus's, let's see, Kustomize libs. I haven't seen this. So this is a JSONet library that reimplements the core transformation operations in Kustomize. Yeah. So this is I love Gus. He's a JSONet believer. This actually does a lot of the semantics that you expect with Kustomize. A lot of the sort of common operations of like whack in some namespaces, whack in a new label, that type of stuff. I think what we'll find here though is that some of the things like rolling a config map are things that are not going to be easily replicated because without something like libksonnet, you're not going to have the schema awareness. Now, I do think it's reasonable. Like I wouldn't mind specifically. Like I think the schema awareness, like the utility there, I'm not sure, because I wouldn't mind like using some sort of templating thing where it's like if I did like, here like config map like this, some sort of syntax here, like annotating like hey, this is a config map. I want to do a dynamic naming, substitution here. To me, this doesn't seem onerous. It's not quite as magical as the stuff that Kustomize does, but I don't think that's too bad. Yeah, the settings are global. They're global as in, so Miguel's asking, aren't those settings global? Do they bubble up to the base through base inheritance? I don't know. Okay, so I'm having fun. This is really interesting stuff. I want to do one more thing here just to play around with it, and then we're going to actually go ahead and I'm going to have to sign off because we're running out of time, is I want to play with the changing a container image here. So what I can do here is I can do images, and the image that we're going to be changing, I want to see how does this work, because I just want to play with this. Now, do I have to specify the whole image with the tag, or can I just specify the base name? Let's try that first. And I want to set the new tag to green, or red. I think I have a red one. So if I do, did this actually go through? All right, so this configured deployment.apps. I can go here. All right, and now I'm running the blue version, right? Oh, wait, no, I'm not running the red. Like, did it get re-rolled? No, okay, so this is interesting. I have to say I want to go from blue to red here. So you have to specify the entire, the fully, wait, no? What did I do wrong? I'm moving fast, sorry. I'm feeling, all right, so we have blue, and we want to change blue to red. So I have blue going to red. It says unchanged. What am I doing wrong here? Okay, it did get red. Oh, I don't have a red. Ha! So what do I have? What did I name them? I have different versions here, and I named them off of colors, but I just did this. Oh, blue, green, and purple. I need to create a red one. Okay, so we'll do purple. And I wanted to do something QWERTY where it actually changes some colors and stuff. Apply. That got configured. So now I go through. Now we're running the purple version. Let's change it to the green version. Do I have to specify the full name of the image? Yeah, okay, that got it. Okay. Oh, why is it dirty? I don't know. I have to figure out some of my generation stuff. Okay, so yeah, so this is how this is how you can go through and actually say, hey, I want to modify the image. But again, this is global, so any version of this image is what I want to modify. What you could do though is you can create sort of like, and this is where, you know, it starts looking kind of template-ish, is I could create this like, you know, invalid image here, right? And then I want to say, I want to rewrite, you know, invalid image to something. And this, if we do this right, it'll go ahead and go ahead and do that. So like if you want to actually sort of have logical names for your image and then actually use your customization.yaml to say here's the true name for the image, at some point it doesn't matter what I put there, it's just a unique image name tag that I can then override in my customization. So I think that's probably a way to abuse Kustomize a little bit here. All right. So hopefully that was some useful stuff. I definitely learned a lot. Thank you all for sticking with me. This one, this is such a deep topic. It seems so freaking easy. We're just managing YAML. How hard could it be? It turns out it's really, really, really hard. And so it's easy to think that this is an easy problem and bitch about YAML, but it turns out that there's some real depth here. And this is something that you know, a lot of smart folks have worked on for a long time. So thank you very much. I think I'm off next week. I think Chris is going to return next week for TGIK. I'm not sure what the topic's going to be yet, but I'm sure it'll be fun. And thank you for joining me. And we will see you all next week. Oh, wait, Phil just posted something here. I want to make sure that we get this before everything disappears. What did you post here, Phil? We got Kustomize meta issues. Okay, so we got setting replicas of first class like images, fine-grained control, config map. That came up a lot. Order of resource means nothing. Yeah, I did see that, that you guys create a graph there and then deleting in reverse order. So those are the things that we saw. I'm trying to think, was there something else that I hit on? I don't think so. I think that's the big ones. I thought there was another, but I don't know. But if I remember it, I'll shoot you a note or put it in here, Phil. All right, thank you, everybody. And, oh, I'm sorry, I switched around my face. There's the link that Phil put in there with a meta issue covering some of this stuff, some of the ideas and stuff that we discovered here. If you guys have other, gripes, ideas, definitely put it into the Kustomize here. Oh, yeah, we didn't get a chance to actually really do the patching and the overlay. I have a lot of ideas there. That's going to have to be something else in the future. Oh yeah, change of labels duplicates pods. That was something, and then the namespace stuff. The fact that the namespace override doesn't actually handle namespace resources. Those were the two other issues that I think we hit. All right, thank you everybody, and I will see you all next week.